Arizona. Hope you're having a super fantastic, sparkling day. Welcome to Before the Dirt Nap podcast number 2034. And tonight we are talking about historical weather events and their impact on our ancestors. Yes, so why would you choose that topic? Well, maybe you've come across a brick wall and all of a sudden your ancestors have disappeared. They're no longer on the census report or the electoral roll or the directory in the towns that you have them living in. What happened? Maybe some natural disaster came along and they moved. Just something as simple as that. So your question for today is, have you ever discovered that your ancestors lived through a major storm, drought, or natural disaster, and how did it affect their lives? So with dramatic weather events can impact families such as the Dust Bowl, the Galveston hurricane of 1900, the Great Blizzard of 1888. Oh, can't even read my own writing. Actually, it's not my own writing. I typed it. I can't read the font that I used to type this. So you've got migration patterns. Also in there, I'm going to add just a little bit as well, because you also have breakouts from health, because sometimes when you have a major disaster or anything out like earthquakes and floods and everything else, the health of the people get affected as well and could lead to having a pandemic or something similar to that occurring. So how major storms, earthquakes, and floods shaped family migration. The impact of natural disaster on migration. Hurricanes and coastal flooding forced families to relocate inland away from vulnerable shorelines. Some stayed rebuilt, others moved. Drought and crop failures. The Dust Bowl of the 1930s pushed thousands of families from Midwest to California. Earthquakes and fires. You've got the San Francisco earthquake in 1906 that displaced thousands, reshaping entire neighborhoods. Then you also have the Great Fire of Chicago, which displaced many businesses as well as families. There were some businesses like, we ain't rebuilding, and they just packed up and left. But where did they go? Families often moved to railroad towns, factory cities, or regions with better climate conditions. Some communities never rebuilt after disasters, forcing entire populations to leave permanently. That's where you get all these little ghost town things coming from. Signs that your ancestors were affected by the weather event. Drastic location change between census records, from New Orleans to St. Louis after floods. Sudden disappearance of a family name in one area and a reappearance elsewhere. Death certificates listing exposure, hypothermia, drowning, starvation, or even something else like the Spanish flu that was in the early 1900s. If an entire family disappears from records, check if a natural disaster forced a location or caused fatalities. And where do you find this? That's a really good, I'm glad you asked that. So finding records of ancestors affected by natural disasters, you've got newspaper and disaster reports. Local and national newspapers often reported on storms, fires, and floods and earthquakes. Check obituaries or articles listing victims or displaced families. Government and relief agency records. The Red Cross and Salvation Army kept records of disaster relief efforts. FEMA and older federal relief programs may have documentation on affected families. The Work Progress Administration, the WPA, recorded stories of disaster survivors during the Great Depression. Census and land records. Property loss from disaster often resulted in tax changes or property foreclosures. Census records may show new living arrangements, such as a widow or orphan survivors living with extended family. Yeah, or even their household suddenly increasing in 10 years by taking in more people. Maybe the others got displaced by a natural disaster, and now that your ancestors' household has become the extended family home. So check both ways. So either your ancestors got relocated to another extended family home, or the extended family got relocated to their home. Look at that. If they've got a lot of people staying in their house that weren't on the last census, and it might just say boarder or lodger or visitor. Sometimes it will put in there like sister-in-law, brother-in-law, that sort of stuff in there as well. But if it's just got like lodgers or boarders, things like that, check to see who they are, because they could be distant relatives who are now living with them because they got displaced by some disaster. Church and cemetery records. Many churches provided aid to disaster victims, and those records may list names. Cemetery records have mass burial plots for victims of major weather events. If your ancestors suddenly left town, look up weather history for that year. There might have been a disaster that explains their mood. Sorry, their move. Not... let's see. Oh, yeah, it does say move there. Okay. So I told you I can't read my own font that I chose. So how did extreme weather change occupations and communities? Weather events that forced job changes. Farmers were affected by drought. They had to take an industrial or railroad jobs or go work on another farm. Coastal fishing families often moved inland after devastating storms. Many people became migrant workers during and after the Dust Bowl. Industries created or destroyed by weather. Logging and timber industries thrived after hurricanes that knocked down forests. Think about what's happening with the thing. Floods and fires led to stricter building codes, changing the way home and businesses were built. I can tell you this, in some areas of New Zealand, you are not allowed to build a brick home because of the earthquake. It has to be a wooden structure. So you've got things like that you have to think about. Floods and fires led to stricter building codes. Oh, we did that one. Some towns were abandoned entirely due to repeated weather disasters and the cost of it was cheaper to move somewhere else than it was to rebuild. There's another one that would go in there as well. Families adapted to new climates. Some families moved to warmer or drier regions due to health concerns like tuberculosis patients moving to Arizona. Immigrants adjusted traditional farming methods based on new soil and climate conditions. And in the late 1800s, many people believed that rain followed the plow. Plow, for those that can't understand the accent. Thinking farming itself could change the climate, it turned out to be a myth. So extreme weather has shaped families for centuries. Our ancestors had to adapt, migrate, and rebuild after natural disasters. So my challenge for you today is look up historical weather events in the areas where your ancestors lived. Did they experience a hurricane, a blizzard, a drought? And you can even throw in, I just suddenly thought of this, avalanches. If they're up in mountainous regions where they got lots of snow, did they get caught in an avalanche that forced them to move? Was there a flood that came through the area? Was there a pandemic in the area? And sometimes after natural disasters, an earthquake was the other one, you do get an outbreak of some sort of disease like the flu because under stress you got wet, now, cold, all that sort of stuff. So there can be some health outbreaks as well. Our ancestors lived through storms, droughts, and earthquakes, and their resilience shaped our families today. We today also live through storms, droughts, earthquakes, pandemics. So just remember, what was it like for them? And this is really cool to uncover. Maybe in those newspaper articles, you might find firsthand accounts. You might find firsthand accounts of what their life was like living during that time, what happened to them, what happened to that family. There could be, the firsthand accounts, this is what happened in our house. We're leaving the area or we're going to rebuild. It'll be listed in there. It could be this, they're going to move to another state to stay with family for a while before they come, and they're going to come back and rebuild, or they're just going to move to another state, stay with family and rebuild there in that area. So newspaper articles are huge, especially when they talk to witnesses about what it was like to go through that time. If it's in the area that your ancestor was and it wasn't them that was quoted in the newspaper, still have a look at those articles, because the people who are being quoted in those articles could be living in similar circumstances to what your ancestors lived in. So this is where you can use other people's stories to help build your ancestors' stories. What was it like? It wouldn't have been exact, but it would have been somewhere in the ballpark of what your ancestors went through. So you've got those firsthand accounts of what it was like, even if it may not have been your ancestor who was reporting that information. So there's a lot of great information out there about that. So I tell you, newspapers are my favorite things to go to. I love reading different articles and stuff. And I know in New Zealand, it's pastpapers.co.nz, I think it is. And that gives you some really cool, and you can search through it, and then you can it has like every newspaper publication that ever came out, and you go through and you can check. It usually lists all of them, but you can go and uncheck regions because you only want stuff from this particular region in New Zealand because that's where your ancestors came from. You could also put in their mining accidents as well. I've had 2 great-grandfathers. I've had a second great-grandfather who was killed in a mining accident. Actually, I think there might have been 2 of them. So that these search parameters that you're using for weather and natural disasters and things like earthquakes, floods, fires, those sorts of things, you can also apply to things like mining accidents, pandemics. What was the other one that was just in my head? There was another one in my head. It disappeared. I'll think of it later. I'll wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning and go, that's what it was. But then I can't report on that, so you'll have to wait. But anything that involved a lot of people, shipwrecks. That's another one, shipwrecks. Did you have any ancestors on the Titanic? Did you have any ancestors who survived the Titanic? What other shipping things were there that may have been that? Railroad accidents where trains turned over. There was a massive earthquake in New Zealand on the South Island, and I can't remember when. There's also one up in the North Island too, where the earthquakes that happened, avalanches, they caused avalanches that this earthquake moved all this earth and tipped over these trains. One of them was actually on Christmas Eve. I can't remember what year that was. Oh, I should look, because I didn't think of it at the time. But that was natural disaster. It was an earthquake that caused all this land to move and tipped the train over, and it was on Christmas Eve. That one was in the North Island, I think. I know we had one major one in the North Island and one in the South Island. So I'll have to go look those up again. But look for things like that. Earthquakes, what did they cause? Did any of them cause an avalanche? Or just nature letting loose of some snow? I know in the 1990s in New Zealand, Mount Cook, which is our tallest peak, almost became the second tallest peak when it had a huge avalanche. It was just this huge ice shelf that took off a good portion of the top of the mountain as well. And there were 2 skiers, did they make it? There were 2 skiers or climbers that were up on the mountain, and they managed to take shelter. But when they woke up the next morning, there's a big portion of the mountain down below there, and it's still the tallest peak, but not by much. I know that much. I used to actually have a sweatshirt that had on it about Mount Cook, the highest peak, and actually had the measurement on there before the avalanche. And when I saw that one after the avalanche, and I was actually living here in the States when that avalanche occurred, and I looked at that sweatshirt and I thought, that's not accurate anymore. It is still the tallest peak, but that measurement, yep, that's out of there now. So there's all sorts of things that can happen that can affect your ancestors and where they lived, even through to modern times. We've had here in the States, we've had all the different hurricanes that come through, the Category 5 hurricanes that come through. There's all this flooding that's going on. There's the winter storms where people are getting buried in, places are getting buried in snow, having record snowfalls, that sort of stuff, ice storms that come through that affect things. You've got, and of course, when everything melts, there's flooding that may occur because of the water that's generated from the melting. There's all sorts of stuff around. We just went through I call it the global pause. We just went through that, a couple of years ago, and people are still recovering from that today. One of the jobs I had when I worked for Marriott years ago was when Hurricane Katrina happened. I actually volunteered and we sat in a call center. We created a call center at Marriott head office, and I was there for 2 days over a weekend, calling up our employees from New Orleans to find out where they were, because we wanted to get their paychecks to them. Where can we send you your money? And so we were calling employees that had like emergency contact phone numbers. We were calling their cell phone numbers that were on record. Any number that we had on their employee record, we were calling to find them, and then letting them know that, hey, if you go here on this particular day, we're having a job fair within Marriott, so we can find you another position within Marriott until you can get back to New Orleans. Are you wanting to go back to New Orleans, or are you wanting to relocate somewhere else? We got in there and we were just calling these employees. and the associates to find out where they were, how we could get their paychecks to them, and finding out if they wanted to go back to New Orleans or they wanted to relocate somewhere else. And if they wanted to relocate somewhere else, they had a certain place that they could go to get more information about jobs within Marriott if they wanted to stay with Marriott International. So we were doing the best that we could for the associates, and it was very rewarding to be able to help those people. It was a really cool. It was just a lot of fun. And I know these people had lost everything. Some of them had like the most, and most of the people I talked to had the most amazing attitude towards everything. And they were so grateful that the company was reaching out to them, because they didn't know what was going to happen with their jobs. They didn't know anything else. And so we were able to give them that information that took a lot of stress off them, and helped them take the next step forward as to what they wanted to do and where they wanted to go. So it was very rewarding to do that. And it was such a privilege to be able to talk to these people during this time of complete upheaval and to offer them hope. That was really cool. And that whole vibe was through the whole the call center that we had created. We were in some meeting room somewhere, and they had these tables all hooked up. We had telephones hooked up. We all had computer monitors so we could look up the information and everything else. And we kept the vibe high in that room so we could pass that high vibe on to those that had been hit by Katrina. There were a couple of people that were sort of like, absolutely not. We're not going to work for Marriott ever again. And we're not going back to New Orleans. No way, no how. And was like, okay, how can we help? We were there to help them. And that was one of the most rewarding things. So you will find things going on. There'll be records and there'll be reports, and newspapers are one of the best resources for all of this, especially those that happen back in time in the 1900s, the 1800s, even further back. You're going to get stories of stuff that was going on. So take time to research the records, have a look at them. How many people can you find in your ancestry? Maybe that's going to get you through a brick wall, because suddenly your ancestors completely disappeared from an area. Go check out the newspapers around that time that they disappeared and go find out what was going on. And we'll see you guys back here tomorrow evening at 6 p.m. Pacific. Yep, we'll be back tomorrow evening at 6 p.m. Pacific. Go out and have a super fantastic sparkling evening. Hey, konara.